I want to tell you a story. It's about a man named Bhushan Kumar Mittal. He was 66 years old from Barnala in Punjab. And one morning, he found himself standing in a line, waiting for something that millions of us just take for granted every single day.
You have to picture this scene. The sun it was beating down, and the line he was in, well, it stretched so far you could barely see where it ended. Everyone was clutching an empty gas cylinder. Their faces just told the whole story, a mix of exhaustion and quiet desperation. Mr. Middle stood there, sweat pouring down his face, but he didn't budge. An hour went by, then two.
He just needed one thing, one single LPG cylinder to take home so his family could cook. That's it. But as the hours kept dragging on under that brutal sun, the mood in the crowd started to shift. And then, without any warning, Mr. Mittal just collapsed. People immediately rushed over to help. An ambulance was called, but it was too late. The doctors said he'd had a massive heart attack. He died. Right there, in that queue, waiting for a cylinder of cooking gas. But as this awful tragedy was happening on the ground, something really bizarre started happening online. A completely different story began to spread, one that painted a picture that was, well, just a little too perfect. All of a sudden, thousands of posts started flooding social media, and they all said almost the exact same thing. My LPG cylinder was booked at 11:45 a.m. and delivered at 1:30 p.m. The timing was identical, the wording was identical. It just didn't feel real. It felt like someone had hit copy and paste over and over and over again.
So think about it. On one hand, you have a man who literally died waiting in a line for gas. And on the other, you have this online chorus claiming everything is perfect. It raises a huge question, and it's the whole reason we're doing this explainer. What is really going on? Is there a shortage, or is the truth being buried?
To even begin to understand this, you need to know this number: 31 million metric tons. That is how much LPG, or cooking gas, India uses every single year. It's an enormous amount, enough to fill over 600,000 tanker trucks. And that demand has just exploded, especially after government programs helped millions of families switch from old wood stoves to modern gas ones. But here's the catch. Here's the big problem. India doesn't actually produce enough gas to meet that demand. Not even close. About 60% of the country's entire supply has to be brought in from other countries. And that dependency, well, that's the system's single greatest weakness. You see, almost all of India's imported gas has to travel through this one tiny waterway you see on the map, the Strait of Hormuz. It is one of the most important shipping lanes on the entire planet. Something like 20% of the world's oil flows through here. So if this route gets blocked, the whole world feels it, almost instantly. And that is exactly what happened. Geopolitical tensions in the Middle East suddenly boiled over into conflict. The U.S. launched military strikes, and in retaliation, Iran threatened to shut down the Strait of Hormuz. The effect was immediate. Global energy markets went into a full-blown panic. Shipments stopped dead. And just like that, India's main supply line was cut. Now, officially, the government is saying there is no shortage, and that these long lines are just because people are panic buying. But the reality on the ground, what we're seeing in videos from places like Delhi and Pune and Lucknow, it tells a much, much different story. We're seeing endless queues, online booking sites that have totally crashed, and families waiting for hours, sometimes for nothing. And whenever an essential item becomes this scarce, you know what happens next. A black market just explodes. A normal cooking cylinder that should cost around 900 rupees is suddenly being sold for 2, sometimes even 3,000. And for businesses that need commercial cylinders, prices have shot up to 6,000 rupees. That's nearly 6 times the official price. And that has absolutely devastated small businesses. In some big cities, up to a third of all restaurants have had to just close their doors temporarily. Food delivery apps are seeing orders drop by more than half, not because people aren't hungry, but because the kitchens literally don't have the gas to cook the food. But of all the numbers we've looked at, this one might be the most shocking. India has almost zero strategic reserves of LPG. The country's entire emergency stockpile of cooking gas would run out in less than 2 days. Just let that sink in. A nation of 1.4 billion people with a 48-hour buffer. So the big question is, when does this end? Well, experts are looking at a few possible outcomes. The best case, a quick ceasefire in the Middle East that reopens the strait. Another possibility is getting smaller shipments from other countries. But even in the most optimistic scenario, we're probably looking at 4 to 8 weeks before things get back to normal.
So for those of you dealing with this right now, what can you actually do? Well, if you have reliable electricity, an induction cooker is a really good alternative. If it's available in your area, applying for a piped natural gas connection is another great option. And it's so important to report anyone selling cylinders on the black market. And please try to avoid panic buying. It really does just make a bad situation worse for everyone.
But here's the harsh truth. For hundreds of millions of people, especially in rural India, those solutions we just talked about, they aren't really solutions at all. In so many villages, the electricity isn't reliable enough for an induction stove, and pipe gas networks, they just don't exist. And this might be the most heartbreaking part of the whole crisis. For years, there's been so much progress in getting women away from the dangers of cooking with firewood and dung, and now millions of them are being forced right back into those same smoke-filled kitchens. Decades of progress, just undone. Because when you really look at it, the true cost of this crisis isn't something you can measure in oil prices or geopolitical strategy. No, it's measured in the health of a child who's breathing in that smoke again. It's measured in the small restaurant owner who's losing their entire livelihood. And tragically, it's measured in human lives. It's measured in the life of Bhushan Kumar Mittal, a 66-year-old man who just stood out in the hot sun hoping to get one cylinder for his family and never made it home. It's a powerful reminder of just how fragile the systems we all rely on really are, and of the very real people who suffer when those systems break.